Then the disciples of John came to him saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "The wedding guests cannot mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them, can they? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old cloak, for the patch pulls away from the cloak, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into old wineskins. Otherwise the skins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved."
One of the great things about having multiple preachers at Ashfield Baptist is that you get to hear a variety of perspectives, which means that I get to be a little bit unhinged, and you can just go, "Oh, that's just Eidan doing an Eidan thing." Me and Micah talked a lot about this sermon series because we actually have quite different understandings of fasting. So hopefully the diversity between us can cover the diversity between you all. Now, we know each other pretty well, right? So I feel like you can let me be a snob for a second. Can we just do a little snobby? I think that Protestants don't know how to fast, and they should stop pretending that they do. Thank you, Naren. Okay, well, you don't need my sermon anymore. The Protestants, we have a problem with fasting. Whenever the Protestants get together to talk about fasting, the first sentence is always, "Oh, well, fasting is about more than just food." I was like, yeah, well, it is about food, though. Have we earned the right to say that? Why don't we like traditional fasting? The rest of our Christian brothers and sisters, centuries of fasting, Great Lent for a month, sometimes additional fasts. The Orthodox Church is 200 additional fast days where you eat vegan. But we are just like the little Protestants. We're like, "Oh yeah, well, it could be about coffee or something. I don't really mind." Is it just because we're the relaxed part of Christianity? Well, the relaxed groups of Muslims, so I grew up with a people group that you would tie the headscarf as if it had just fallen off your head, rather than hijabbing. You're just like, "Oh, no, I must have put it on but it fell off at some point." But they still fasted, right? I fact-checked this with my mum. I said, "Mother, were the Uyghurs chill about fasting the way they were with headscarves?" And she was like, "They were pretty strict, but not to the point of spitting saliva. That is because swallowing your own saliva might count as drinking." That's what they're doing with fasting over there. And that's what our other Christians are doing with fasting over here. So what are the Protestants doing? Why don't we like fasting? Do you guys want to know what I think? Well, you have to. It's the Protestant work ethic. It's the influence of Puritanism and Calvinism. I'm so serious right now. Those of us of Protestant heritage have been taught this kind of spiritual individualism and then economic discipline. Faith is something that happens first personally between me and God and then outworks itself in doing a really good job at whatever I happen to be doing for my job anyway. Which is to say that we make a great workforce for capitalism. I wish I could do my whole sermon series on this point, but anyway. I think Protestants have trouble with fasting as a spiritual practice because it's quite incompatible with how we usually understand and express our religion. More on that later. But what are we missing out on? Do you guys want to know about the time that I fasted Ramadan? Yeah, you do. No. You're like, yes, I was particularly pissed with Christianity at the time. How did you know? I'd found out that I was still a believer. I was looking for something that I couldn't find in the churches that I went to at the time. And I had found out that my pastor had never fasted, not even for a half day. And I was like, okay, it's one thing for us lay people to have never fasted, but you can't be the professional religious and haven't tried one of these core, see, I'm a snob, right? Tried one of these core Christian things. I was like, I'm going to do it myself. Yeah, I lived my whole life like this. I did keep a journal at the time, but I couldn't find it, so I've summarized it for you. It went like this. Day 1, I am hungry and really excited to do this cool spiritual thing. I have my little alarm set to remind me to pray 5 times a day, and that's kind of cool that you're praying 5 times a day. It's a lot more than I normally do it. Day 2. I am hungry. Day 3. Oh no. I can't explain to you just what it was like, but just for a single image, just imagine me, 4:30 a.m., standing in front of the microwave that's microwaving plain rice, because that's the only thing I can stomach at 4:30 a.m. in the morning, and I'm just staring there, and the rice is going, yee, and I'm like, fasting. Whatever. Everyone knows how dependent we are on food. Like, I was the crankiest person I'd ever been in my entire life. Like, my brain was foggy, I couldn't think straight. Fine. Everyone thinks, oh yeah, fasting is going to teach me how dependent I am on God. And I did learn that, to be fair. But that was just like the first lesson. It was so much more than that. I was weak, scared, cranky, and at the same time, I was smug. Right? I met my worst self in the mirror and I was powerless to stop them, walking around being like, oh yeah, I'm secretly fasting. And also being like a complete jerk to everyone, no matter how hard I tried, because I was too hungry to not be like a cranky little... And I could see the cycle in front of me and I couldn't stop myself because I was just too hungry and tired to be anything else. Completely laid low by a single spiritual practice. How much more laid low am I by the bigness of God? But I also learned to long for the kingdom of heaven in the way that I longed for the sunset, for the physical signal that it was time to meet with my friends and pray and eat and drink and laugh about the ridiculous day that we had and then eat some more. The kingdom of God is longed for just like the sunset, and just like the sunset, it's inevitable. So, was it worth it? No. It was. I don't think it's meant to be worth it. It's pointless and irritating and involves you acting against your better interests, just like I do with my life normally, actually. So we don't know how to fast. We Protestants, just exclude yourself if you're like. We don't know how to fast because culturally we are Puritans and Calvinists, which is to say, most of us grew up with the implicit idea that religion is a religion of self-improvement, a religion of a watchmaker God who gave us the tools to make something of ourselves, and now our job is to make something of ourselves. A religion of spiritual individualism, of being a good teacher, plumber, lawyer for the Lord. I'm going to save up money so I can buy a house, so I can host Bible study for the Lord. Ooh, how convenient that our religion is always quite close to what we were going to be doing anyway. I think that's why we want to make Lent efficient. Maybe we pick something up that we feel we really should be giving up anyway, like social media or chocolate or slouching. That was a real one. We can't give up anything we really do need, obviously. That would be silly. We still have to, do all of the work and the being a good person. We don't want to be head fuzzy or cranky or tired or mess up our metabolisms or trigger our disordered eating. Or maybe we want to give something up so that we can make room to add something else in our life, because God forbid we do less work. This is about efficiency. This is about, making stuff so that we're doing more of the good thing. We can't just let ourselves sit in the uncomfortable smallness and inevitable uselessness of our bodies. No. Our religion is about the improvement of self and society. I think that those spiritual practices that I just poked some light fun at, giving up caffeine or social media or replacing the morning phone scroll with a devotional time, the Protestant Lent practices, if you will, I think they're actually really great if you want to do them. Really, like I'm doing one at the moment. But I don't, and I'm being a snob, but I don't think it's accurate to call them fasting. And I also think that's okay. Unlike breaking the bonds of injustice, I believe fasting is a spiritual practice that not everybody is called to. And engaging in it out of obligation or guilt would be really harmful. In fact, I suspect that Protestants are particularly prone to associating fasting with disordered eating, not because fasting itself is prone to creating disordered eating, but because we assume that because it's a religious thing, it must be a self-improvement thing, therefore fasting must be good for us, therefore not eating is good for us. But if you've ever fasted, you know that not eating is bad for you. Fasting is not self-improvement. It is silly and inefficient, and most of the time you aren't learning something. Most of the time, you're hungry and tired. And for those who are called, there's something wondrous about meeting God when you're hungry and tired. So, I've described a lot of ways in which fasting in the ancient, everyone did for centuries, millennia, traditional sense, and our current religious culture are not really mutually intelligible. You might be like, oh no, how can we make our religious culture and fasting compatible? But I am not arguing, actually, that we make these two things compatible. I don't think we need to, first of all. Like we're free, we don't have any obligations, and we won't literally have every religious practice available to us in our time and context. But let me say that again in different words. The Bible reading for this week is a tiny section that seems at first glance to have two different stories, one about fasting and one about wine, but they are the same story, in my opinion. So, just for a bit of context, this is how you fermented wine in the ancient world. You'd put some new wine, you'd shred the grapes, and then you put it into a wineskin, and you'd leave it to ferment in the sun, and the fermentation process would produce all of these gases, and the gases would stretch the wineskin as it aged, and then you'd have your lovely aged wine. But if you then drank all the wine and then tried to put new wine in the old wineskin, the gases would try to stretch the already stretched wineskin, and the wineskin would burst, and then all the wine would spill out onto the ground. So that's what Jesus is referring to. So then John's disciples came and asked him, how is it that we and the Pharisees, this is interesting, right? We're used to thinking Pharisees, bad guys, Jesus, good guys. But in this case, John's disciples, who we usually think are pretty cool, are also on the side of the Pharisees and that they all fast. How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but you and your disciples do not fast? Jesus answered, well, how can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and then they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, and the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved. This is often interpreted as like an old covenant versus new covenant thing. Like Jesus' gospel is new, so it needs a new wineskin, a new religion, because it cannot fit into the old one. Kind of true. But I've always wondered what the both here means. Both are preserved. I used to assume that he meant both the new wine and the new wineskins are preserved, but maybe he meant both the new wine not getting spilled and the old wineskin not being destroyed. Because this story resists being read as a simple New Testament is better than Old Testament story, because old wine is good. Old wine is the whole point of wine. The old garment is the whole point of why you're trying to repair it with the new patch. If you're always trying to drink the newest and quickest made wine, you're drinking grape juice. So I find it ironic that Protestants drink grape juice. Here's what I think. Fasting is an aged wine. It's an ancient, weathered, well-worn, well-loved, and it's in an old wineskin, which means it can carry a lot of baggage too. On the other hand, let's say, for example, giving up social media as a Protestant Lent practice is a new wine. It's incredibly relevant, right? But maybe not as time-tested as a spiritual practice. It doesn't really belong in the fasting wineskin. I think it needs a new wineskin. Maybe a wineskin called resisting the commodification of social relationships, or the wineskin of not being addicted to superficial communication, or probably just the wineskin of I want to talk to my friends when our bodies are in the same room because I think there's something important about that. I think if we try and put new wine into old wineskins, if we try and call giving up social media as a form of fasting, we lose both. Giving up social media becomes like an individual spiritual practice instead of just a practical act of justice and care. And fasting becomes some kind of scaffold for continuous self-improvement, another New Year's resolution, another habit-forming practice, yay, Protestant work ethic, instead of what it really is, this strange, unintelligible ocean that I've barely scratched the surface of, and I'm really glad that so many of my Christian brothers and sisters are holding and carrying down through the centuries, because if I can't understand it, maybe my children will understand it, or my grandchildren will return to it and go, this is what I needed all along. Otherwise, we end up saying, yeah, I gave up social media for Lent once, but I don't really think fasting is for me, which sounds a little bit like, I don't think I'd really enjoy swimming in the ocean, because one time I jumped into a puddle and it didn't really do anything for me except give me soggy socks. Fasting is a seasonal practice, right? Sometimes it is the season for fasting and sometimes it is not. And I don't mean in the calendar season, I mean in your life season and our cultural season. If it is your season, then you should do yourself the honor and respect of doing it well, of seeing what it is that so many people love about doing this practice. Find a group that can teach you. You don't have to find Muslims, that's just me. And if it's not your season, I think we can do ourselves the honor and respect of freeing ourselves from the idea of it altogether. It's not like another list of things Christians do, and it's like, oh crap, I haven't done this one yet in my life. You don't have anything to prove, right? That's the whole point. That's why we're here. Fasting was a central and life-giving expression of my faith for a while. But it's not my season anymore. It hasn't been for a long time, actually, and sometimes that makes me sad, but it's also kind of good. So how do you decide whether it is the season for fasting for you? Well, I trust your gut instinct on that, like do it if you feel called, and if you don't feel called, don't do it. But there might be another way to tell. Going back to the passage, is the bridegroom with you, or has he been taken from you? Take a moment and just kind of pick where you feel like your soul is settling in those two options. You can change your mind later, I don't care. Okay. Who has the bridegroom with them? Neri, is the bridegroom with you? Then why would you fast? Well, how can you fast when the bridegroom is with you? Silly. And if we want to do something for Lent that isn't fasting, you know, I'm sure we can find something. I'm sure you have something cool, Nerida, that calls you and is life-giving in that area. It probably just is fasting, I know you. Anyway, that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm doing a Protestant Lent tradition because that's what feels right, because I feel like the bridegroom is with me at the moment. But for those to whom the bridegroom has been taken from them, those who are like Esther facing the genocide of her people, David watching his baby son dying, Israel turning to the Lord with all her heart. If you look for the instances of fasting in the Old Testament, they aren't casual. Are you looking for evidence that God is bigger and wilder than the storm that threatens you? Are you looking for a people who have walked this desert before you for millennia? Do you want to join generation upon generation of your kindred who can hold in their hands your pain and trauma and death as part of one holy life side by side with their own? Do you need some way to make the pain held physically in your body, to make art out of the emptiness by rising and falling to prayer like the rising and falling of the sun? Well, fasting is an ancient practice and it is bigger than you. And that's what you need. It's not useful, it's sacred. That's exactly what you need, the useless, defiant sacred. We know that Lent is not about trying to be a better person, nor is it about remembering that you are not a better person. Calvinists, shut up. Lent is about seeing that our worst selves are not something to be afraid of. They have a place in our calendar and in our story. Our worst selves are holy and loved too. From dust you are, and to dust you shall return, and you are wonderful and glorious dust, the useless, defiant, sacred. But what if I want to do both? What if I want to partake in an ancient practice with all the Lord's people, but I also want to do something sensible and good for me and that makes sense with my framework for the world and feels, life-giving and not going to make me anxious or cranky or sad? What if we want our old wine in our old wineskins and also our new wine in our new wineskins? Is there something like that we can unify around? Some ancient way to make food and friends and the passage of time and the end of the day and the longing for the kingdom ritually represented and sacred? Yeah, I think so. I think it's called saying grace. Shall we pray? In the words of decades of my childhood, thank you, Jesus, for this food. Amen.